And we're live. Today I'm here with Huli. Welcome, Huli.
Thank you. Thank you. Thrilled to be here.
Yeah, and you just spoke at the Control the Room conference and excited to unpack a little bit more in this area that you're kind of focused on in your talk.
hmm
Um, and I'll just say one of the things that inspired me the most was uh, this concept of reverse mentorship. And Um, it's not the first time I've heard that, but it stuck with me since the talk, and I've been thinking I really need to find some folks to bring into my ecosystem. So thanks for that inspiration.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been hugely powerful for me. The idea of being over 40 and working in a fast paced environment, as we all do, gives us the opportunity to be curious about what maybe we're missing. And so, an invitation to someone under 30 to mentor us can be a real advantage in the workplace. And it's especially powerful, I think, because when you think about ageism, 40% of the complaints to HR about ageism in the workplace are from people under 40. They are underappreciated in the workplace and they undervalue themselves. So
Mm.
self-limiting thoughts keep them from making the contributions they might. So there's a really rich partnership opportunity there.
Yeah, and when we think about just the I would say the habit or the nature of humans to kind of create groups and cliques and little niche communities, and language emerges from those, and it's powerful because it can connect us, but it can also divide us. And so
Oh, it absolutely can. Language is so powerful, and we see it with all kinds of marginalized communities. But when you look particularly at ageism, it's even more subtle. You know, how often have we heard, "Oh, millennials all do this," or "Boomers never do that"? I see it every day on LinkedIn. These kind of generalizations that, and on Twitter, certainly they're a little more colorful there, but the generalizations about these bands, and certainly it's instinctual, right? For those of us to gather with people who we think are similar to ourselves, but there's something so rich about finding something in common with someone that you didn't expect. And
yes.
so to be able to put a group together that's actually people who all really love Joni Mitchell or all really love those Keane paintings with the big giant eyes. I mean, that crosses generations, whether you care for those particular artistic expressions or not. They're not confined to what year you were born.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to conditioning too, right? The more if you're drawn to someone because of a connection, and sometimes that's school, sometimes that's hiring policies with inside
Sure.
companies. It's
Mhm.
or you're playing sports, and we want to group by age just because we don't want to we don't want a 13-year-old trying to compete against a 30-year-old.
Of
That's not
course.
necessarily good, right?
That's
And
not
so
fair. Yeah.
and so, like, naturally, there's these forces in our society that bring people together, and they develop their own language, and then that further reinforces these differences. And I love this idea of
Mhm.
peering into those groups and cross pollinating this stuff, because that's truly innovation, right? If we can understand, borrow, integrate, then we're really embracing the true power of diversity.
Oh, absolutely. And you're also embracing and leveraging different learning styles, because
Mm,
at different points of our life, when we're emerging in our careers, quite often we're collecting information, we're absorbing information. And when we've got some more experience, we've got some more context, we're we're able to pick up those concepts more quickly because we have a frame of reference for
mm.
them. So partnering someone who is a sponge, who's absorbing everything and picking up on concepts really quickly, and placing them with someone who gets the big picture, who gets the context, who understands why it's important, that can be one of the best teams in your organization. So it's a matter of bringing them together and leveraging those strengths and those different learning styles. And everybody has something different they bring to the table.
Absolutely. And you talk about the context and this kind of this awareness people might have
Mm.
that allows you to kind of almost fill in the gaps. You might be able to get very little information, but be able to have an epiphany quickly because you've kind of you've done the environment scan before. You've kind of seen the territory. So when this new piece of information comes up, you can fit that in. And
Yes.
and that's not always tied to age. As we were kind of talking in the pre-show chat,
Yep.
there's an assumption that hiring managers have that, like, oh, they're older, so they're going to have this context that,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not always a fair assumption, right?
No, it's not always a fair assumption. There are plenty of people who are pivoting later in their careers, who are having multiple careers, multiple tracks. And so you might have someone who's younger chronologically, who has been single-mindedly pursuing something since they were a kid because they found their path early. You might also have somebody who's later in life, who has more lived experience but is new to a field. So the idea of a junior designer or a junior engineer looking a certain way is really outdated, and the language, I think, is more accurate. Might be an emerging
Mm.
designer or an emerging musician or an emerging whatever. Who knows how many fascinating adventures you've been on by the time you've gotten to that point. You may be new to this field, but you're not new to life, and you get to bring all of that with you.
Yeah, this notion of emergent also has this kind of connotation that there's more to come. There's this
Absolutely.
like future that we're hopeful for.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
I would hope that we're all focused on that. It can be hard, and certainly there's a lot of chaos in the world right now, but I'm biologically just hopeful. I'm genetically hopeful, I guess. And so the idea of someone emerging and mastering and growing and then iterating and maybe becoming something else is a really exciting uh, framing for me.
Yeah, and coming back to this like reframing of kind of junior to emerging, I think there's so much nuance to language, and we kind of talked about this a bit in the pre-show chat around how if we're more intentional about the language, that's a design choice. We can design our language and think about the
Mhm.
future we want to manifest. And I think you were talking about a New York Times article that you had recently read.
Yes, there's an opinion piece that was posted on LinkedIn yesterday, an interesting conversation about it, and it was written by some advocates in the aging space. Um, and they were proposing tongue in cheek that people of a certain age try to reclaim the word codger. And they were talking about codger power, and they even said in the piece, with a wink. Um, my take on it is that there are words worth reclaiming, and there are words that we might just thank for their service and let expire into oblivion. And I would put codger in that category. Um, Elder is another word that can be fraught.
Mm,
And there's the mental model that comes with someone leaning on a cane, or someone who's frail and has less capacity, and that's not very helpful either. But we're still learning, right? We're still creating this as the over 40, over 50 population in the workplace continues to grow. And this is so important now that we've got multiple generations, so to speak, in the workplace, that the work life is getting longer.
mm,
That is not just 18 to 65. There are people working long past 65 for all kinds of reasons. And unless you ask them in the interviewing process what they're seeking, what they're looking for, you have no idea how they'll
yeah,
contribute to your organization.
100%. And I'm a firm believer that it needs to even start before the interview, because if we've already made assumptions, if we already categorized and excluded people based on
Mhm.
some bias, or just some weird way we read the resume, or some how they were
Mhm.
coached on preparing it, then we
Mhm.
might have missed out on a real opportunity. And that's why we have a questionnaire we have folks fill out, and that's the first thing we read. It's like
Oh, that's so smart.
these questions that are germane to the work. And one of the questions is, why are you passionate about this opportunity, or what's
Yeah.
compelling
Why
about
are you here?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's really telling, like, how people approach that. And you brought up a really important point too that I hadn't really thought a ton about, which is there's performance anxiety when it comes to like a phone screen or an interview, where if people have time to put stuff down on paper ahead of time, they don't have to worry about being so on the point and so quick, or
Mhm.
just having a bad day.
Sure, sure. Well, it gives you the opportunity to refine your thinking. Um, some of us are introverts and do better having that solo time to contemplate before we have the words leave our mouths. Some of us are extroverts and don't mind it as much. That's why things like liberating structures are so powerful in facilitation, because you're making room for
Mm.
all the different kinds of thinking and all the different ways of presenting. So I applaud you. I would much rather do a questionnaire than have to write a cover letter from scratch and hope I'm hitting the points that the hiring manager wants to address.
Yeah, and if those that are listening, I think my epiphany was, not to make it like a criterion or filtering mechanism where it was like a rote test, and make it more about stories and experiences. So these
Yes.
behavioral interview questions that we all love, put them in
Mhm.
there and have
Yep.
them like just tell us some stories about times when they've done things, or anything of interest that will help you just assess where they're coming from. And
Right.
it's really
Because oh,
powerful.
how brutal is that in an interview when somebody says, "Tell me about a time when," and you come up blank.
Yeah,
And
right.
you know you've got a dozen experiences that relate to that, but that wasn't a scenario that you had planned out. With this other opportunity, you can be thoughtful and say, I've got three to choose from, but this is the one
Yeah.
that addresses this point the most effectively. So I, on behalf of job seekers everywhere, thank you. Thanks for
So,
doing that.
and speaking of job seekers, we talked a little bit about like you're early on before the show started,
Mhm.
around what your thoughts were for people that are maybe looking to do a career shift, because you were talking about how popular that is. And in fact, y'all
Mhm.
did an event. It's like 1,600 people signed up for this thing. Over
Yes.
40
Yes.
job switchers. Wow, it's the crazy.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you mentioned exploring. That's like really interesting. I'd love to hear a little bit more about why it's so important to explore, as part of this kind of interest in job switching.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that can actually be almost fun about career pivoting is this idea of exploring what's out there. Because if you've been in a position for 10, 15, 20 years, let me tell you, the landscape has changed, and not in a bad way, not in a good way necessarily, but there's just a lot more information out there for you to consider as you think about where to go. When I think I see on Austin Digital Jobs all the time, someone saying, "Hey, I'm interested in getting into tech. Where should I start?" And well, where should you start? What
Like
do you
tech,
like?
yeah.
What makes you tick? What are your values? What what kind of change do you want to make in the world? Because there's design, there's management, there's coding, there's artificial intelligence, there's accessibility, there's green UX, there's lean UX, there's a million different places, and the only way to find the one that's going, or the ones that are going to be really satisfying, is to explore your internal landscape, what your values are, and then see what's out there. If you're an HR professional and you love coming up with policies and you think you want to move into tech, there might be a startup that's a great fit for you that would love to have your expertise keep them out of jail and come up with their personnel policies. And it could be a perfect fit for you. You don't have to go back to school for that. So that idea of exploration is really exciting.
Yeah, it reminded me of an article that I saw recently, and it was talking about how hot streaks in your career. They were studying hot streaks and like the nature of hot streaks and like what people were doing to like enter them and maintain them. And they were saying that they were always kind of, well, let's say before a hot streak, there's always a zone of exploration. So whenever someone experienced a hot streak, they always went through a deep exploration before. They were soaking in all sorts of different stuff, and then boom, they found this magic moment where they integrated all the things that they were realizing in medicine. It's like really quite cool.
That's powerful. It feels like, or it can feel like, when you're putting a lid on a jar and it's just spinning and spinning and spinning. You're like, what the heck? I know how jars work. And suddenly you feel it go into the groove and it clicks. And then it's easy from there. Sometimes life is like that, where you're spinning around, just checking out all the options, and then you drop in to something that feels really powerful for you. But the only way to find it is to spin.
That's really quite nice. And I want to just hit on one last point before we wrap today. And I want to make it full circle. We kind of talked about reverse mentoring at the very beginning. And something you said brought me back to this concept of reverse mentoring. And it was this point you said, if you've been in a role for 10 years, things have probably changed. And that's the same as if you've been going around saying woot for 10 years. People probably aren't saying that anymore. The kids aren't saying that anymore.
Yeah.
And so just like you could get a reverse mentor that's 17 years old that can help you understand the culture and how things are adapting. If you're at a big company, or even if you're at a startup that's been around for 10 years, maybe go get some mentors in a startup or a fresh new company that's like kind of approaching things differently. If you've been hacking away on a monolithic application for years and years and years, go talk to someone who's using React or Framer or some new tool, right?
Change it up. There's the worst thing that can happen is you learn something. That's the worst thing that can happen. And even if you never use what you've learned, you're using your brain, you're staying active, you're staying curious. And no matter what line of work you're in, curiosity is always going to serve you. It's authentic, genuine curiosity. There's a radio show when I lived in LA, and one of the questions they used to ask is, what's up with that? And if you can come to every situation with that framework, that person seems really angry. What's up with that?
Right.
I want to know more about that. That person seems a little shy and nervous about speaking up in this meeting. What's up with that? Where might that come from? So powerful. So powerful.
I love good questions. So what a great way to end. Maybe ponder what's up with that, everyone. And Huli, thanks so much for joining today. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure, Douglas. Thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it.